Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Allahumma la sahla illa ma ja'altahu sahla wa anta taj'alul hazana idha syi'ta sahla. Allahumma arinal haqqa haqqan warzuqna ittiba'ah wa arinal batila batilan warzuqna ijtinabah. Terima kasih saudara pengurusi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, welcome to University Technology of Malaysia. Welcome to CASIS, Center for Advanced Studies on Islam, Science and Civilization, UTM Kuala Lumpur. And welcome to International Conference of Ulama, Islam and Civilizational Revival. We'll be here for 3 days, inshallah. And today we will listen to two keynote address by two of our respected scholars. This conference is jointly organized by Pertama, Pertubuhan Tarikat Antarabangsa Malaysia, and by CASIS, Center for Advanced Studies on Islam, Science, Civilization. It is our pleasure to present to you two keynote address by our colleague, esteemed scholars from two countries, one from Malaysia by Prof.Dr. Zainiy Uthman, and the other from Turkey, Prof.Dr. Bilal Kusmidar. Interestingly, both of them, without design, so both of them are have served at CASIS at ISTEC before in 1990s. In 1990s, and particularly, Prof.Dr. Zainiy Uthman has done his PhD under the supervision of Professor Syed Muhammad Naqib Al-Atas. And as I said before, International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, ISTAC, was established in 1987 by Professor Syed Muhammad Naqib Al-Atas, the renowned scholar, thinker in contemporary world. Without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Professor Dr. Zainiy Uthman. He is a former director of CASIS 2015-2017 of the Center for Advanced Studies on Islam, Science and Civilization, CASIS, Malaysia, University Technology of Malaysia. He has obtained his BSc Science from University of Wisconsin, Madison, USA, and his master's degree from University of Chicago. He joined the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization in 1991 for his doctoral dissertation, and he completed his doctoral dissertation under the supervision of Professor Syed Muhammad Naqib Al-Atas in 1997. He was Associate Professor and Curator of ISTAC Library from 2002 to 2003 and was later awarded the British Chevening Fellowship, where he spent academic year in Oxford Center for Islamic Studies. And in 2005-2006, he returned to Oxford as visiting fellow at the same center. He has translated The Meaning and Experience of Happiness by Professor Syed Muhammad Naqib Al-Atas. And with Professor Wan Muhammad Nuwan Daud, he co-edited a book entitled Knowledge, Language, Thought, and Civilization of Islam, Essays in honor of Syed Muhammad Naqib Al-Atas. And his PhD was in Raniri's manuscript by Sheikh Nuruddin Ar-Raniri, a prominent Sufi and thinker of the Malay world in 17th century. Sufi and thinker of Malay world in 17th century. Without further ado, I would like to please welcome Professor Muhammad Zainiy Uthman.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Thank you, Dr. Khalif Muhammad, my esteemed colleague. And I would like to thank you, my co-presenter, Professor Dr. Bilal, who I believe was there in my defense during my viva of my PhD. My esteemed colleagues from different parts of the world, I'm grateful to Pertama and Y2G for having me and being given the responsibility to give this very important keynote address. I shall be reading most of the text. I hope you do pay attention. Thank you very much. My keynote is entitled as Islam and Civilization because I think this conference is about reviving Islamic civilization. So I think we want to go back. What brought us as a civilization? And I think the key idea that we've been missing is the idea of Islamization. Unfortunately, many of us now becoming consumer Muslims. We pick and choose what Islam that we like, but we do not take on the responsibility of delivering Islam. We do not deliver Islam. We pick and choose what we want of Islam. So therefore, I would like to begin with a simple proposition that a key idea or a key concept forms the basis or the foundation of any civilization. And that concept or idea is the distinguishing characteristic unique to that civilization. The idea or concept is a unit of knowledge that grows within a network of meanings, of key terms, which are encapsulated and kept vigorously alive and animated within a worldview. Civilization is often defined in terms of a highly organized and structured society with its political, social, economic, religious, and scientific institutions in place, with advanced urbanization and human social organization. Well, these are common aspects, physical, observed by earlier historians, people like Ibn Khaldun among us, and Arnold Toynbee from the West, in their analysis about past civilizations. We always see, political structures, buildings, and what have you. But prior to the advent of Islam in the Arabian Peninsula, and prior to the coming of Islam as a religion and as a civilization, there were the Roman in the West and the Persian in the East. The physical aspects mentioned above can be seen in these two earlier civilizations. At the rise of any civilizations, as they move on, this aspect gain stratification. They become more sophisticated. They gain strength. Political institutions become stronger. But at the decline and fall of any civilization, and here this is where we must keep in mind, these are the caveats, and these are the ibarah that we should learn from Ibn Khaldun. As they decline, these aspects begin to break apart and lose importance, the grip and the control over the public. And eventually, this whole thing loses currency. And this is what we are facing now. some of the public among the Muslims, from the Maghrib all the way to the Indonesia, they do not trust the ulama, they do not trust the asfiya, they do not trust the fuqaha. Yeah? This is what is happening. Now these two civilizations, the Roman and the Persian, they declined and eventually fell due to their own internal and external reasons. But Islam rose. When they too fell, Islam rose and took its lead. The time period in which Islam took to rise and expand as a civilization, with all the physical aspects that I mentioned, caught the world by surprise because it was very fast. But the Arabs, prior to Islam, and I do not mean this in a negative way, many of us also prior to Islam, the Arabs were not known for their economic, military, or political force in the region. Yeah? The trade in the Arabian Peninsula prior to the coming of Islam was also limited only to the peninsula and the Roman outskirts of the greater Syria, Bilad al-Sham. The Arabic language, prior to the revelation of the Quran, was not a remarkable language like Latin or Greek, because Arabic prior to the coming of Islam or the Quran did not possess a body of philosophical, scientific, literary, and religious writings, constituting what is now called the body of knowledge, compared to Greek and Latin. The pre-Islamic Persian Empire controlled over vast expanse of territory. It too has its own variant languages. Militarily, politically, economically, scientifically, and culturally, prior to Islam, the Arabs were no match to these two empires. This is a miracle of Islam. One of the key factors that made for this such quick Islamization, quick transformation of the Arabs, and later on, the peoples of the newly liberated lands of Islam in the process of what is called Futuh Buldan. Wherever Islam went, it's called Futuh Buldan. Is what Professor Syed Naqib Al-Attas termed as Islamization. Professor Al-Attas defines Islamization as the liberation first from the magical, mythical, animistic, and ethnic cultural tradition incompatible with Islam, and then from the secular control over one's reason and language. Because how do you make da'wah? You communicate using a language. And this is why language is very important. Islamization begins with language, and with Arabic language itself, and that is with the Quran as a revelation. This revelation, Al-Quran, is the speech of God concerning Himself, His creation, the relation between Allah and His creation, and the way to salvation, Sirat al-Mustaqim, that was communicated by the Prophet, not by sound and letter, yet comprising all that he has represented in words and then conveyed to the Prophet, and the Prophet later on conveyed to mankind in a linguistic form, new in nature. This is the Islamization of the Jahili Arabic into the Islamic Arabic with the Quran. New in nature, yet comprehensible without confusion with the Prophet's own subjectivity and cognitive imagination. Because some people accuse it's the Prophet's words that created the Quran. Astaghfirullah. The Arabic of this Quran, the revelation was then interpreted and demonstrated by the Prophet's own words and actions. This becomes the hadith and the traditions. The Arabic of the Quran and the hadith, that is the sayings and the tradition of the Prophet, provided the initial impetus and plays the most important role in Islamization until today. Until today. This is why we must again make alive ulumul hadith, the ilmul rijal, all the tabaqat asfiyat, whatever, ashabu hanabila, ashabu malikiyah, ashabu shafi'iyah, this ilmul rijal must again. The reformulating and the reshaping of worldview through language of the revelation, namely the Quran and its interpretation in the prophetic words and actions, as Professor Al-Attas shows in his works, I think has not been articulated and placed with such degree importance by earlier scholars. And I think this is the key contribution that Professor Al-Attas has made to us. The Quran facilitated the formulation of the worldview of Islam because Allah Ta'ala described it to be the speech of God revealed in a new form of Arabic. This Arabic of the Quran is a new form of Arabic. The description of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His sifah, by Himself, in His own words. Therefore, our understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not human description, not like in any other religion. And this is the beginning of the process of Islamization. The purification of the nafs, tazkiyatun nafs, begin with the tazkiyah of the understanding of what is God, who is God. And this has to begin with revelation. Thus, the Quran plays a key role in the initial stages of Islamization. The Quran reorients the mind to a new understanding of the truth and reality, haqiqah, simultaneously discarding and replacing the old perspective of life and its old cultural objects and values. This is called the worldview. The elements of the Islamic worldview, as defined by Professor Latas, are the nature of God. Yani, the asma and wasifat Allah Ta'ala is described in the Quran. The nature of revelation, ma'na al-wahyu. And then the nature of prophethood, the nature of knowledge, the nature of the world, the meaning of freedom, ikhtiyar, the meaning of virtues, mahmuda, fadila, the fada'il. These are things that actually guide us in life. And finally, what makes the worldview, by the process of Islamization, the meaning of happiness, as-sa'ada fi dunya wal akhirah. Because earlier civilization did not have this issue, did not look into these issues properly. New ways of performing religious obligations in acts and words, personal and social alike, along with the new personal and social moral codes, became the hallmark of the new way of life and civilization it engenders. And that is Islam. Now, these are derived from the teachings of the Quran and the sayings and the traditions of the Prophet ﷺ. As Islam spreads out of Arabia, out of Mecca, out of Medina, it heads towards Persia, down to India, proceeded down to the Malay archipelago, Biladu Jawi, and finally at the end of this continent. As it spread to China, it charted the Silk Road. But it did not effect a civilizational change as it successfully did in Persia, in India, and in the Malay world. Islam transformed the peoples of Palestine, of Syria, of Egypt, North Africa, the heart of Africa, Spain, and Constantinople. In these major parts of the world, again with the exception of China, Islam brought about a birth of a unified civilization with all its diversity, and we can see it here. Subhanallah. This is like ihtifal, really, this is ihtifal. Unified with all the diversity, one that is based on the worldview of Islam, facilitated primarily with the advent and the creation of new world languages, and these are called the Muslim languages. With the Quran and the prophetic traditions, because their eminence degree in relating truth and reality of the new religion, Arabic serves as the mother tongue of the new world of Islamic languages that came into being to support the belief, practices, and cultures of the new Muslim population all over the world, all over the liberated and Islamized land. Al-Buldan Maftuha, that has been opened. It's a new language that supported, and in some lands, Arabic replaced entirely the old language. Arabic replaced entirely the old language, like Egypt. Egypt, prior to Islam, you perhaps will be talking in hieroglyphic, or maybe Greek or Latin because you were ruled under the Roman. Syria, prior to becoming Islam, Muslims, or Futuh al-Buldan, you were perhaps under the Roman. You might be speaking Greek or Latin. So Arabic transformed entirely the language of that people. It became, well, interestingly, after Islam, the Egyptians are known as Arabs. But in some places, it gave birth to new languages like Persian fi Iran, Urdu in Pakistan and India, Jawi in the Malay world. This is unique. This is what I meant by Islam and the Muslim brought something. This is what Islamization is. And this is where we must think of the challenges that we have now. So, we have Swahili in Africa, and we have Ottoman in Turkey, Professor Bilal. It's quite amazing. A new language came into being, and these are the works of the Muslim da'i. Their names are not known, who they were. But a new language was created. New literatures were produced, new sciences were discovered and developed, new sets of rules and regulation for finance, for financial, administrative, and legal conduct, fortified with local custom, urf, were put in place and practiced, as well as new values and ethical standards of conduct attained new vigor, replacing the laws and ethics of the old imperialism, especially of the ancient Persia of the East and the classical Roman of the West. And in this part of the world, the Javanese, Hindu, Buddhists that held sway over this part of the world. We cast them out. We throw them in the ocean. We picked up Islam and its Sharia. We picked up Jawi and left the old language by the side. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, my esteemed colleagues, Islam is not a thin veneer. Because people say Islam is like many layers. You pull out, then you see the Hindu, and then you pull another layer, you see the Buddhist, and then you pull another layer, because to them Islamization is like libas. You put on one over the other. No, Islamization is not like that. It is also not a predicate. It's not a predicate. It's not a sifa that you append to a mawdu', leaving the mawdu' unchanged. Islam is not like that. The strength of the conversion of Islam into Islam is not only body, but more importantly, the strength of the faith caused an internal, rational, and intellectual implications involving the concepts of Tawheed that slowly but effectively gained sway over the minds of the Muslims, replacing the old theological and religious concepts and practices. An ummah of unified global identity has come into being, and as it is described in the Quran. A new life shared for the greater good of humanity. Luxury and riches that were once the privilege enjoyed by the imperials, the nobles, and the military of the ancient regimes now can be shared across the society because of the ordained commands of zakah, of sadaqah, of waqaf. Education, very early on with the coming of Islam in the newly liberated lands, was made available for all walks of life, fully supported not only by the state, but more importantly, by private and personal initiatives. By virtue, again, by the sadaqah, by the zakah, and the waqaf that we mentioned earlier. Healthcare was no longer the privilege of the few, but enjoyed by all. Again, new ethical and civil standards were promulgated, enacted, and practiced as a way of life. Having said the above, a civilization is never at rest. It never is static. It is never inert. It is not an achieved status quo. A civilization that is in stasis is as good as a dead civilization. Vigorous living and being humanly are the distinguishing features of civilization. Its vibrancy and accomplishment is attested by its neighbors or contenders. Yani, your jiran, your jar, can tell you whether you're doing well or not. We always compare with the next one, yes? Or the competing, that's why Russia and America, China and America, they always compete. Which is good? Islamic civilization is no exception. A civilization thrives, it becomes vibrant, and is kept sustainable when it is in a dynamic stability mode. This term dynamic stability was coined by Professor Wan Muhammad Noor, my esteemed senior colleague who is now on vacation. He's now in Malacca addressing another retreat, a smaller retreat, and I'm sure he would love to be here. The dynamic and stable nature of Islamic civilization can be seen in the workings of its internal forces, because Islamic civilization is a civilization that emerges from the diversity of cultures of Muslim peoples of the world. as a result of the permeation of the basic elements of the religion of Islam, which these people cause to emerge from within themselves. We create Islamic civilization. Let us now turn to a more specific example of Islam in the Malay Indonesian archipelago. It was mentioned earlier in the introductory speech that let's think about what happened in Indonesia and the Malay world. Islam liberated the new believers from their ancient beliefs and practices of the old imperial powers with their decadent and values and culture. Subjugation and disenfranchisement became a thing of the past. In this part of the world, the coming of Islam was not by military conquest. This is quite unique. Islam was not brought here by the sword, but it was by a slow and going process of what is called Islamization. The idea and the concept of oneness of God, Tawheed, and its allied concepts shaped this worldview that we know today. Islam and the worldview that is shared among groups of individuals, and they travel out of this country. This part of the world, you know, it's thick jungle, it's tropical, it's not easy. We don't have 4x4s like they do today. And you have mosquitoes, and you have insects, and you have, you know, all kinds of animals in the jungle. So it makes the work of Islamization, of the da'is, you know, it's not that easy. We do not have the comfort of air-conditioned motor cars to move about at that time. So these are the people that kept the worldview alive and vibrant. Yani, this is really something that we must remind of the great effort of our earlier predecessors who came to this part of the world. But again, Islamization faces its challenges, and that is the confusion and error in knowledge. And this is a result of distorted and displacement of meanings of these key terms of that worldview. And this will present to the worldview of Islam with a systematic glitch that can and will scramble the network of meanings and eventually break and disintegrate that worldview. And this is what we have been experiencing of late, either in Egypt, either in Libya, with the idea of freedom. The idea of freedom, we want to be free. Free from what? The idea of equality of women. Many things, these are key terms. So let's look at these ideas that Professor Latas has developed on the Islamization of the Malay world deeper, and we'll see how it went. We have mentioned that the main contributing factor to the speed and the spread of Islam in many parts of the world is the Arabic language, because it is the sacred language among Muslims, and it came to serve as the mother tongue, again, number one, for the sciences that is religious in nature. Then it is the ulumu naqliya and ulumu aqliya. And this was facilitated by adoption of the script, the Arabic script, for these new languages. The language landscape of the Malay archipelago, because of the early Hindu and Buddha influence, was heavily shaped with Sanskritic vocabulary, quite similar to that landscape, the language landscape of the social and cultural strata of South Asian, described in the 14th century Sanskrit inscription from Andhra, with what is called diversity and language and custom, the words in Sanskrit meaning bahasa, samcara, and bida. These same words are still in the Malay language today. Bahasa, sama cara, dan juga berbeda. But look, there are some things that we kept, but it has been Islamized. It has no Hindu, Buddhist content anymore. This is the contribution of Islamization. Therefore, a very active, when we use words in speech, writings, in communication, we must use words properly. And by the divisions, these words, these languages into divisions of lands, distinct lands in the 14th century. The word there in Sanskrit is called desa. So for the Malaysia, the word desa is from Sanskrit. This is one of the main reasons for the confusion and error in knowledge concerning Islamization of this part of the world, because some people claim that Islam came to this part of the world from India, and some say that it's from China. Well, the history and the growth of the development of the Malay language and literature, that is an example that we can see the process of Islamization. a new scientific conclusion was made by Professor Zainiy Uthman, who says that the history and rise and growth and development of the Malay language and literature is one of the most important processes in which marks the Islamization of the Malay archipelago. The arrival of Islam to the Malays not only changed the religion of the Malay kingdoms from Hindu, Buddhist, animist to Islam, but it adopted the Arabic letters and script. So letters like Jim, Ain, Fa, Qaf, Mim, Qaf, and Nun, these were the 5 letters that were created to create new letters in the Malay language. Cha, Nga, Fa, Ga, and Nya. Now, these letters, Professor Latas described it similar and using the analysis that was made by Ibn Khaldun on the introduction of these new letters in the Berber language. So, the Berbers of Morocco used the Arabic script. The sound Ga of the Berber tongue was thought to be the sound between the Kaf and the Jim of the Arabic alphabet. This is described in Muqaddimah Ibn Khaldun, and you can read the rest of it. So, therefore, Arabic adopted in the Malay world is called Arabo-Malay. It is not Perso-Arabic. This language, Jawi, is not Perso-Arabic, but rather Arabic-Malay. So it's the case with the Malay alphabets Jawi. And Professor Latas explained the creation of the letter Ga, the letter Cha, the letter Nga, the letter Pa, and the letter Nya. Why? Because it wants to incorporate, accommodate new key terms using the language which is innate and natural to the tongue. So similarly, here's quite interesting, pre-Islamic Arabic language. Again, prior to the coming of Islam, Arabic was of limited use and lacking in the body of knowledge. So was the Malay language, so-called Malay language. Malay was only a street language. But with Islamization and the adoption of the Arabic script, the Malay language went through a major revolution. This is a real intifada. It's real intifada. It revolutionized the language. With the adoption of the Arabic script and letters, apart from the vocabulary, the mufradat, being enriched with the key terms and words from Arabic and Persian, the Malay language was made into a language of communication. And that is why today we have Malay and Indonesian, we're communicating the same language. For the whole of the Malay-Indonesian archipelago, this language overthrew the Javadis language. It became the language for Islam. And because of that, it is now the official language of more than 100 million users in Southeast Asia. It is from the south of Thailand to some parts of Cambodia, to Philippines, to Brunei, to Singapore, to the whole islands of Indonesia, and also Malaysia. It's quite big. This is because of Islam. And we must use this language. The Malay language, therefore, is an Islamic language and possibly the second language largest in the Islamic world. The spread, development, and growth of the Malay language were caused by the influence of Islamic culture that places priority on the literary culture, which means thaqafatul ilmiyyah. It's very scientific, very literary. Malay literature prospered in the Islamic era. Prior to the coming of Islam, there were not many writings in Malay. But with Islamization, with Islam, there were many writings. We have tafasir, we have kutubul fiqh, we have so many things. And this is similar what happened to Persian also. Prior to the coming of Islam to Persia, there were not many works written. But then after Persia became what is now Farsi, we have so many works written. So therefore, it is not beyond the realm of possibility in considering the origins of the language which is now known as Malay. Islam also played in the role, not only the creation of a language, but the creation of a nation. And this is, for example, I mean, you look again at the Arab countries prior to the coming of Islam. Egypt was not an Arab country. Palestine was not really an Arab country because it was ruled under the Romans. Syria was not really an Arab country, it was ruled under the Romans. But once you become Arab, you become Muslim, you adopt Islam, and the Arabic that serves Islam, you create a nation. So this is something that is quite unique. However, whatever people say about the earlier language of the Malays, saying that no, there were earlier language called Malay using the old script, the Jawi, Pahlavi script. Again, Professor Latas is of the opinion, and we have seen also evidences of this, that there were only small things. Like there was one professor who found a list of utensils or sundry items, but this cannot be said as Malay language because it's just a list of things. Like, for example, you found a list of things, you can assume they were a language, but it was not. There was no supporting body of literature that can support it as a language. There was no poetry. There was no prose writing. So it's not a language, it's just a list of things. It's like, for example, if I know a few lists of things in Greek or Latin, it does not mean that my language is Greek or Latin. I'm just good at some philosophical terms in Greek. Isn't it? As simple as that. So, the most meaningful and specific conclusion that can be arrived at is the comparison that has been made between the Achanese tombstone dated 1380 and the Terengganu inscription dated 1303, written in Jawi. The Achanese tombstone has a language style not representing the Malayness of what is present, as opposed to the Terengganu inscription. And I have I've edited a book on this, and Professor Latas has written a book on this. You read the inscription of the Terengganu inscription, the language sounds very familiar to us today. That is what it means by a modern language. That no matter what age you are in, the meaning can be understood. And this is also the strength of Islamization of a language. And that is why when you read works of the earlier ulama of the past, Professor Bilal is an expert on Rumi. You read Rumi in Farsi because of the Islamized Farsi, it is as current as it is today. Because meaning is conveyed, and this is what it is, the importance of language. So the arrival of Islam brought not only Arabic script that was adopted as the Malay script with some additional letters specific to the language, and it is a Jawi script that bind and unify the Malay language into one language. All minorities of the Malays of this part of the world, whoever they are, they may be Minangkabau, what else, Batak, Jawa, whatever, they speak Malay. And they can read Jawi. And I was proposing, if we all go again by reading these old Jawi manuscripts, we'll be speaking proper Malay. Not like Indonesian and Malay today. The concept of Jawi binds all the various minorities into one, and it is based on the unification of the Malay language as a language for all in one script. And this can be found anywhere in the Malay Indonesian peoples. And it's also one of the elements that started a historical process towards the inculcation and the concept of nationhood in every individual called Malay or Indonesia. In other words, Indonesian and Malaysians today in this hall, if you want to be one again, let's read the same thing, let's understand the same thing. That's how you develop common understanding. And this is the same thing that you can see. Professor Bilal can attest to that in the language of the Turkish today. It was based on the Ottoman. If you change it slowly, then you start to feel the differentiation and the stratification between Turkish and Kurds and whatever you have. And we get into racial differentiation, and it's going to be very messy. So Professor Latas observes that in the 16th and 17th centuries were the most productive periods in the writing, which are philosophical in nature, metaphysical, there's rational theology in this part of the world. The first translation of the Quran into Malay was based on the work by Al-Badawi, and the other translation and commentaries of the original works in philosophy, metaphysics, and theology were all carried out during this period. This is the period that may see the rise of learning, scientific learning. So this is also coincide with the intensification of Islam in the Malay Indonesian society. As I said earlier, it revolutionized the worldview and formed the basis of its culture and transformed it from an artistic or aesthetically based culture to one that is scientifically in nature. Therefore, the treatises, the writings of Islam, on Islam that became widespread in the archipelago shows that most of them contain the elements of metaphysics, which is tasawwuf, of the high level in the world history of thought and metaphysics. I was teaching a class and we were reading Nuruddin Raniri. He was in the 1600s. He coincides with Descartes. So if we place these authors, we can know that they were at the leading philosophical thought of the time. It's just that the languages are not put together. But when we look at the elements, Professor Apasalan tried to compare the idea of being and existence in Sadr and Heidegger. So our ulama discuss very high metaphysical, philosophical matters, and we are able to do that. The new Islamized Malay spirit rejuvenates the new life, with the rise of rationalism and intellectualism as the most forceful drive that initiated the process of revolutionizing the worldview of the Malay society, maintaining the intellectual realm that requires logical thought and logical order. Concepts such as ideas of equality of a person to another grants even an ordinary person with respect and dignity. Now, these were unimaginable before Islam. When you read stories about these things, it's very funny. I think one of the missionaries came to this part of the world, and before Islam, the Sultan, so-called Sultan, or the king or the ruler of the time, called out a slave, and the slave would hold a knife to his throat and go, because he followed the order of the Sultan. This is what we meant. There's no longer that after Islam. Nothing like that. Therefore, with the coming of Islam, the Islamization, it is a defining age in history, the rise of rationalism and intellectual knowledge, while affirming a social system that is based on individual freedom, justice, and personal dignity. The intellectual and scientific basis concerning religion, religious and spiritual excellence, and knowledge spread far and wide. Islam brought about the spirit of rationalism and intellectualism, not only in the palace, but also the public at large. We can see many works in Malay that discusses matters of philosophy and metaphysics. For example, two main figures by Fansuri and Raniri. The palace and the nobility in this part of the world soon begin to actively patronize, supports the writing and interpreting works on sciences such as tenets of belief, the aqaid, the fiqh, language, history, metaphysics, and Islamic philosophy with the aids of the intellectuals and skillful translators and the consciousness of the people, the works on ethics and morality with the consciousness of the people with regard to the dignity of man and the majesty of God in Islam. There are also treatises on ontology, on cosmology and psychology, works of the Mutakallimun, and also works that are based on Greek philosophers like Plotinus, Aristotle, and Plato. This shows that the Malay literary works were not based on myth and tales, not dependent on the patronage of the palace and the aristocrat. On the contrary, the works were more democratic and scientific than the previous works, more intellectual and more rational. As late as the 19th century, there are Malay interpretations and translations of writings of works such as by Ibn Arabi from Spain and Wali Raslan of Damascus. I would like also to add that the works of Professor Latas, his works, can be ranked along the same line as these works. And that is, Professor Latas has made a great contribution in the present day concerning the achievement of metaphysics and philosophy and religious thought in this century by Muslims of this part of the world. We know that his works is being read by Muslims in America, Muslims in Iran, and Muslims in Egypt now. And in Indonesia, there is a huge following of the works of Professor Zainiy Uthman. So Professor Latta sees this new trend of Malay Indonesian writings has achieved a certain characteristic of precision and elegance in style, using the vocabulary and the technical terms, and it presents itself as a logical language, a language of rational thought that puts priority on analysis and scientific discourse, a language that has a lot of influence on its users. Who are they? The metaphysicians, the scholars, the learned, the translators and the commentators of the Quran, who projected the influence of the worldview of the Quran and extolling the value of clarification and rational characteristic in discourse, conversation and writing. This is the modern Malay, just like what happened to the modern Persia. This is the modern Malay. So Islam changed not only the physical structure of the Malay society, but more importantly, the very spirit of the person. Islam is the only religion of all non-Christian religions that made an advent into Europe and left its significant effects that changed world history. Islam came to this part of the world, it changed world history. Islam went to Egypt, it changed world history. That's another one. Not only languages, but world history. Gentlemen and ladies, this is something that we must do. We must again change world history. How we do that? Let's think about it together. The characteristic that is unique effects of Islam on a people, therefore, should not be looked into buildings, into matters of things and physical in nature, but more importantly, things that are hidden from the eye, and that is in the thought and the language of the people. And I think this is where ulama plays a very important role. We don't care so much about building buildings. We care about building people. And how do you build people? It's by the language and communicating meanings. Therefore, the mission of the Prophet, again, was not a selfish mission. It is not for himself. It is not for a personal gain and for personal salvation. The Prophet did not do this for himself. I would like us to consider here that the civilization of Islam must have a function, and that function is to extend the mission of the Prophet. As I said earlier, it is not a status quo. This is Islamic civilization. The Hadarat al-Islamiyah, we sit somewhere and drink coffee. But we must do something, and that something is to extend the mission of the Prophet. Islam is both private and personal, but at the same time, it is public and official. The Sunnah and the tradition of the Prophet ﷺ bears testimony to this. The mission of the Prophet was and is not for material gain, again, and it's not for hegemonic political power. And this is something that we have to remind ourselves. We are in this business, astaghfirullah, is not for money and not for power. I believe the mission of the civilization of Islam is to extend the mission of the Prophet, and this is it, ladies and gentlemen, this is the responsibility that falls on us, the ulama, if we are worthy of the title ulama. Because it is encapsulated in the hadith, Addabani Rabbi fa ahsana ta'dibi. Something I think Professor Bilal will touch upon later. My Lord educated me and made my education the most excellent. And I think you all here have your own instruction and madrasas and what have you. This is what I mean. And this is the way we must do it, is through language, through adab. Adab, Professor Said Naqib Al-Attas defines it as a reflection of wisdom, because it is from the knowledge of the prophets. Adab refers to the recognition and acknowledgement of the right and proper place, station, condition of life, and the self-discipline in positive and willing participation in enacting one's role in accordance with that recognition and acknowledgement. Its occurrence in society and in oneself as a whole reflects the condition of justice. We must do adab to ourselves, and there are many aspects of it. Then only we can do adab to society. And I think we all here stresses on adab when students, the tulab come before us, isn't it? This we must not again become lax. We must stress and stress and stress the importance of adab. Ibn Khaldun made the observation that people tend to give in to pleasures and luxuries of world occupations and desires. This indulgence colors their souls with blameworthy and evil qualities. Injustice is the result of the lack of adab, the failure to recognize and acknowledge the right places of things, whereby the actions that follow only manifest injustice in physical and emotional effects. Ibn Khaldun also made the observation that the companions who were around the Prophet, and this is mentioned in the Muqaddimah, I was reading it a few days ago preparing for this talk. The companions around the Prophet ﷺ observed or practiced the injunction of Islam out of their own commitment and conviction. This is what is called fortitude. One of the meaning of fortitude is close to the word taqwa. The word taqwa. And taqwa is a reflection of adab, really. Taqwa is a reflection of adab. And this is the English word they use, a subset of it, juz'i min at-taqwa bima'na fortitude. How do you hold yourself? Huh? But as the influence of religion decreases, restraining laws become the resort. This is what it is. When people has less adab, you have laws. And then we begin to teach laws. That's why if you have Rijalul Mu'min, the Prophet did not have to teach laws because he has good people around him. Today we don't have good people around us. So we say, do this, don't do that. Do this, don't do that. So many laws now. So governmental and educational laws influence people in that they weaken their souls and diminish their stamina because of that, because they suffer from they were very young until old. Tell them, don't do this. But Rijalul Adab, men of Adab, you don't need to tell them anything, isn't it? They just know. And this is why when we raise our child, we must raise them in Adab. So, it is important for the ulama to return to our prime directive, so to speak, or prime obligation of teaching and perfecting the souls of ourselves, our children, and then our ummah. Let us not corrupt them and lead them into the vicious circle of the loss of adab that Prophet ﷺ has given us a warning. Number one, what are the causes of the loss of adab? The confusion and error in knowledge, which leads to the loss of adab. And then this loss of adab made us elect leaders who again perpetuate this loss of adab. So checks and balances in society must be performed judiciously with knowledge of the right and the wrong that is informed by a worldview based on revelation, namely the Quran and the traditions of the Prophet. Civilization is not merely and only an achieved social organization in a civil manner with a sophisticated differentiation of social and political duties and functions, with its needs, desires, and wants for luxury, as Ibn Khaldun observed. In fact, this is what Ibn Khaldun warned, that this is the very point of corruption of the soul. This is the beginning of the deterioration and the destructions of adab in the soul. Therefore, it is a personal obligation and duty in Islam, which is fardu ain, and the burden of conscience and action is solely on the person. But to admonish the general believers and the non-believers alike, for all to better themselves, that conscience and the duty to fulfill such obligations at the civilizational scale lie on the many individual thinkers, learned scholars, the scientists who are the rightful heirs to the prophetic mission, and the institutions of knowledge and learning that support and promote these activities. The luminary sages, the sages like yourself in front of us today, with us, amidst us today, the thinkers and the scientists and the institutions that promotes this learning, despite the fact that we are working independently. We are working independently from one another and without sometimes government support. And we are separated by time and space. But as a unit, as a whole, as a civilizational force, as the heir, warathatul anbiya, we must work as a unit. And we must perform this unofficially as well as officially. I think Sheikh Karim and his group, and this is what I think their drive is. And the people who supports Pertama, the Y2G today, and CASIS, Dr. Khalif, This is what we are taking this responsibility. So again, to conclude, as a unit of a whole project of Islamization, we must perform both unofficially and both officially the binding duty, fardu kifayah, for maintaining and enhancing the spirit of the civilization of Islam. Wabillahi tawfiq wal hidayah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Thank you very much.